3rd through 5th grade teachers. This is the first part of our learning series on unpacking the Reading, Language, Arts, and Social Studies unit planning organizers. Today's lesson will be on looking at the vocabulary section. As we scroll through the unit planning organizer, one of the first things that you'll notice are the unit overview, the essential questions and learning goals, and the high leverage and complementary TEKS. For 3rd through 5th grade, usually the very first part of that will be talking about the vocabulary. I can see here that we have two TEKS that we're covering through the unit on vocabulary, 4.3b and 4.3c. Then as you scroll through, you will see the unit assessment. If you are trying to do some backwards by design, you can always open the module assessment and the module answer key and see what questions are going to be asked around vocabulary. Let's take a look really quick. So as I open this up, I notice that there is a text here. And if I scroll through the questions really quickly, I notice that question 2 is a vocabulary question. You can go through these in detail with your PLC and figure out what kind of questions you need to be asking while you're working with students. The second text will also have 1 or 2 vocabulary questions. Let's see. There it is right there. Question 12. Think about the prefix un. So just to keep this in mind as I'm planning forward with my vocabulary, what kind of questions the students might be asked on the module assessment. Then you get to the unit pacing guide. I can see the first section is vocabulary and it is paced for 10 minutes. This is daily instruction, direct instruction for 10 minutes. Now some of the activities might take longer than 10 minutes, and so you're going to want to think about how much time am I going to spend directly talking to students and working with students with vocabulary, and then anything above that 10 minutes, can my students be engaging with that either independently or with a partner? And that can be done during their differentiated small group time. So just looking, I noticed that week 3, I'm looking at prefixes un, in, im, and re. Week 4, I'm looking at prefixes mis, pre, and dis. And week 5, I'm looking at suffixes y and ly. Now I have a couple of options to get to those lessons. I can click on that link and it'll take me directly to that vocabulary lesson. Or I can open the outline on the left-hand side. If you don't see it, click the little hamburger and then notice there's week 3, vocabulary, and I could click there. So let's try that out. There is vocabulary. Each vocabulary block will list the title, the number of minutes, which week and which unit in HMH it's connected to. This one's connected to week 1 of the What Makes Us Who We Are unit, or module as HMH likes to call them, and is covering prefixes un, in, im, and re. I also have listed the ELPs and the TEKS for that unit. And then we see these 3 boxes. The first box is critical vocabulary. This is going to be vocabulary that's used in the texts for the week that is more complex that we might need to go over with students. The middle box is generative vocabulary. These are going to be your affixes, so prefixes and suffixes, and also Greek and Latin roots that you're covering explicitly during that week. And then the box on the right-hand side is the vocabulary strategy that you're engaging with students. These rotate, the vocabulary strategies rotate throughout the school year, so no need to intensely focus on that. It's just to kind of keep it in mind, this is the one you're working with. HMH follows a pretty nice pattern for vocabulary. Within the 3-week cycle, the first day of vocabulary will always be a module launch where you're just kind of investigating the vocabulary of the unit, thinking about the academic vocabulary that's going to be used in the unit. Then the rest of the week is going to be a critical vocabulary day, a vocabulary strategy day, and a generative vocabulary day. And this pattern follows every single week. So just for an example, here's the first week of the unit, and you see the module launch, the critical vocabulary, the vocabulary strategy, and the generative vocabulary. And if I go look at week 4, then I notice, here we go, look, the same items. And then if I look at the lessons, I have critical vocabulary, the vocabulary strategy, critical vocabulary again, and generative vocabulary. And if I go look at week 5, guess what? Same thing, critical vocabulary, vocabulary strategy, and generative vocabulary. The only difference in week 5 is going to be a module wrap up on the last day before the unit assessment. And this really just allows our students some time to synthesize the vocabulary and the passages and texts that they've been reading and come to some consensus. So vocabulary again starts with a launch, ends with a wrap up, and then follows a routine each week where they cover critical vocabulary, generative vocabulary, and a vocabulary strategy. So looking back at that first week, we notice inside of each lesson, there's a learning objective, there is a lesson plan with a link to some pages, then a bulleted list of items, and then a formative assessment. Now I'm going to go look at, honestly, the day 3 here because the module launch ends up being a little bit different. But let's look at day 3. And I see that my learning objective is to identify some real-life connections between words and their use and answer questions and discuss meanings to develop vocabulary. I also see that it's a critical vocabulary day. There are some vocabulary cards listed, a display and engage poster, and then here's the vocabulary cards again. I also can notice from the formative assessment that there are some posed questions. Ask students to name something they did inadvertently, something they consumed. These are words that come from the vocabulary. So I can see that the formative assessment today is really going to be just listening to my students talk about the vocabulary. And that is a really important thing to notice because that gives me some direction as a teacher. And if I want more information about that, I'm going to go click on the lesson to find out. So here I've clicked on the lesson. It opens this critical vocabulary page, and sometimes these HMH pages can be a little overwhelming. So I just want to point out that the learning objectives on the left-hand side, you already have those. The materials linked, you already have those. They went ahead and listed out the critical vocabulary, but we also listed the critical vocabulary. This one will give you the page numbers that they're listed on. If you are in a Spanish-English teaching context, they've listed a couple of cognates for you, which is very nice. But the bulk lesson is the center part of the page. And as I look through this, I notice that it's very explicitly listed. Step 1, introduce the words. They've provided a display and engage poster, and I can click on it and open that up to show it with students. Right? This is just kind of going through the words. And remember, from our formative assessment, we were really focused on discussion. So we're not having kids copy these down or do anything like that. We were really just having some good discussion about it. It even says here, right, read aloud each word, have students repeat it, read aloud and discuss each word's student-friendly explanation, point out the example for each word, have students suggest other examples, so keep it pretty simple. Then there's a guided practice, so guiding students to interact with words by discussing questions such as these, and here are some of the questions, right? Here's another part of I can see right here, this asks students to name something. That was exactly the formative assessment we suggested in the UPO. There's also an application. Have students work independently to complete steps 3 and 4 on the vocabulary cards. Have students use the turn and talk routine to discuss with a partner the prompt on each vocabulary card. So this would be a great item to put into a station for the day to have students just go back and look at it. You might be thinking, well, what's up with these vocabulary cards? Where are they? Let's go look at the UPO really quick, because I remember in that list there was a link titled vocabulary cards. So if I go click on this link, here are the vocabulary cards, and notice they're listed Module 1, Week 1. So these are all the cards for a whole week. So this could be something that you print out. I've seen teachers print them out in like 4 on a page, so that you just have some little cards that can go over into a center. And this is what they were having students do. It says steps 3 and 4. Use the word identity in your own sentence. Make a list of synonyms and antonyms for the word's identity. Right? So this is just another activity that students can do to engage with vocabulary, and it can become part of that station. Okay, so as we go, and I want to go back and look at the HMH page one more time and just show you the bottom where the gray part of the lesson plan is. These are just helpful tips. So sometimes there's a professional learning part, sometimes there's some English language support, and then also there's some pieces about learning mindset. And that's it. We don't need to get lost in HMH. There's no need for me to click to the next page. The entire lesson is listed on this one singular page. So there is that explanation of what is going on. Now, sometimes you will find slideshows and other helpful things. Sometimes, like I notice here for generative vocabulary, there's a link to a Know It, Show It page, and then the formative assessment even says have students work in pairs to complete Know It, Show It page 9. So let's click on that and see what that looks like. And I noticed that this Know It, Show It page is very, very simple. It's just a little chart here with the prefixes above and then some space. It's not necessary for your students to have this exact copy of this page. So this is where we have to kind of be some critical consumers, that maybe it's more appropriate to have them do this on a whiteboard, or to have them do this in their reading journal and just draw the chart out. Because it's such a simplified page. So even though it says to use that page, really it's using it like, let me look at this as a teacher and say, my students can handle having this chart just drawn in their reading journal, and they can write down some words. So always look at the pages to make those decisions when you're doing your planning. And that's how the vocabulary goes. So if you need to open these links to look at the page, I would always make sure that you've looked at the learning objective and looked at the formative assessment that we're suggesting first, because HMH sometimes will give you a lot of learning objectives, and they will give you a lot of options for formative assessment. So we've gone through and cut that back for you so that you are not having to do so much, because we understand you only have 10 minutes to directly teach vocabulary. So thank you for engaging with this lesson, and join us back for the next lesson on Reading Workshop.